2, 1. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Inside Movies Galore. I am one of your hosts, and tonight we're going to be starting our, what are we exactly calling this month? Martial Arts Mayhem? Mayhem?
Yep. Martial Arts Mayhem.
So tonight we are going to be going on about a film that was filmed in 1988. It was put out by Canon Films, and it was directed by Newt Arnold. But it stars Jean-Claude Van Damme, Donald Gibb, Leah Ayres, and Bolo Young. So interesting cast of characters here. Let's see what the IMDb says about this film before we go into first impressions. So Bloodsport follows Frank Dukes as an American martial artist serving in the military, who decides to lead the army to compete in a martial arts tournament in Hong Kong, where fights to the death can occur. So, going with, let's go over to you, Brandon. What was your first impression of this film?
Oh, I watched this. My first time watching this was a long time ago. My father loved he loved certain types of films, and we didn't get a lot of time together when I was like smaller or growing up, because during the week, he would wake up at around noonish and work until after midnight. Well, young me doesn't keep those hours. Well, in school from noon and then midnight to there. So on the weekends, he'd want to spend time and we'd watch movies. So he mentally scarred me with some, like say The Shining at 8. But there were others though that he always loved. He loved the post-apocalyptic ones of the 90s, such as Rising Storm, Hardware, these type of films. And he also loved martial arts films like Bruce Lee, Enter the Dragon, which by the way also has Bolo in it, and a lot of these extra ones, and several of which that we are covering this month. Matter of fact, a lot of my childhood is in this month, and one of those was the Van Damme film Bloodsport. I remember getting this on a VHS and just watching it over and over again. It was just that classic good versus evil, almost video game-like in its method. Plus, I love that Ogre from the Nerds was in it, and he's played a good guy. So this was just a great film for me, and still to this day, I have a special place in my mind for that film.
Okay. Going over to Forrest. Why don't you tell us about your first impressions of this film?
All right. So first time I saw, first time I saw this, I was in college. This is definitely one of those movies that me and my friends would get together. Like we would get together on Friday nights, crack open a few beers and watch together, like laugh, cheer and laugh it up. Huge. I'm also both a huge Van Damme fan and a huge Canon Films fan. Like Bloodsport, Death Wish, the ninja movies. They were the kings. They were probably. I think they and Kuroko were the kings of action movies in the 80s. But Bloodsport, it was it's Van Damme. It was. I call it. I nickname it as Van Damme's masterpiece. like he's in his top form as a martial artist. Great, some good fight choreography. You've got, and again, like you've got the supporting cast like Donald Gibb, Bola Young, Forrest Whitaker, in a supporting role. It's silly. It's elements. It's admittedly it's a silly film, but it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Like the martial arts, the music. But yeah, it's a favorite. I'm actually wearing a Bloodsport T-shirt right now. So
awesome. Jane, why don't you tell us a little bit about your history with this film? Was this a first time watch for you?
Yes, it was. I enjoyed it quite a bit. It definitely put me in the mindset of something like the Street Fighter film, in the sense that I could see why Capcom specifically wanted Jean-Claude Van Damme to play Colonel Guile, because Jean-Claude Van Damme was known for his kicks, obviously, in his heyday, and that was obviously a feature of Guile. And so then you see him, several years before in this film, where you could almost look at it in its own weird way. It reminds me a little bit of a prequel to Street Fighter in a kind of unofficial sense, because there were a surprising number of parallels with characters in the Street Fighter universe in terms of their look and their fighting styles, but then also not just Street Fighter, but also I noticed some connections to like Virtua Fighter and stuff like that, just in terms of like different people's fighting styles, their just physical appearances, that kind of stuff. So I would imagine that the Street Fighter series from Street Fighter 2 onward, which came after this film, although the first Street Fighter game, Street Fighter 1, had come out 1 year before, but that game really didn't do very much. But the point is, like, I could see, based on everything I know about the world of fighting games, which is quite a bit, I could see how a lot of that could have either directly or at least coincidentally been influenced by this film, because were a lot of parallels, because it's a tournament fighting film with fighters from all over the world competing for this very competitive title. You got multiple fighting styles represented. You got ninjutsu. You got sumo, like a sumo wrestler. You got the one
jiu-jitsu.
couple of Mai Tai people as well.
I kind of also feel like it also set a precedent. It also it set a precedent as far as the popularity of MMA.
It did, and also there was the one guy who he had the same, not just Street Fighter 2, but I was thinking of like Street Fighter 3, because I was sort of making character parallels in my head.
Also,
one guy, he had the same fighting style as Elena from Street Fighter 3. She was the one from Kenya, and that guy I'm thinking of, he was the one who was kind of crawling on the ground.
Right.
That fighting style, what is that called? It's called capoeira. And yeah, so it looked like he was doing that. You had the kind of comic relief American guy who was doing a lot of pro wrestling stuff, and
yep,
and he reminded me a lot of Alex from Street Fighter 3.
And
go ahead.
I was gonna say and then of course there's also the I think also you could the makers of Mortal Kombat could definitely took some cues from it too. I mean Johnny Cage himself was based on Van Damme.
He was, and I thought of Mortal Kombat as well. The difference, I think, is that if you're deriving Johnny Cage directly, then certainly, but that would be more from Van Damme's career overall, because as we know, Mortal Kombat was supposed to be a Jean-Claude Van Damme game, and I guess it was the license fell through or something, but The difference here, though, is I've thought more of Street Fighter because of, well, the timeline matches up a little bit closer, but also because Mortal Kombat has always had a very firm rooting in the supernatural. I mean, because the whole Mortal Kombat tournament takes place in Outworld, so it's heavily rooted in the supernatural, whereas Street Fighter, it has its supernatural elements with
Blanca and Akuma.
Blanca, Akuma, Dalsim, one, just the idea of a Hadouken and everything like that. It's all that, those all have some slightly supernatural elements to them, but on the whole, Street Fighter is more rooted in the real world than Mortal Kombat is. So, and plus, like, there are certain characters I was like, oh, that's Fei Long, that's E Honda, that's Adon or Sagat, and all these different characters, because I recognize the fighting styles and just some of their similar looks and everything. So, and obviously because the makers of those games had to grab them from somewhere. So in this case, you had a very good template from which to build many a successful future martial arts film and many a successful fighting game franchise.
And myself, I was introduced to this probably through, again, the Bravo TV men who films for men who like movies type of era, and I know I'd seen bits and pieces of this film, but having never seen it in its entirety, actually watching it in its entirety, I guess that would be a first. Because I'd seen bits and pieces of the film over time, understood where it was coming from, that people love this film, but I guess because I did not entirely grow up watching it, I don't have the nostalgia as other people have of Van Damme. I'm not an entirely fan of Van Damme per se because of his stances. I mean, the fact that his martial arts movements are not as effortless as, like, maybe Steven Seagal or even Lone Wolf McQuaid,
His are based more in dance than they actually are in full-on martial arts, which is where you get a lot of the high kicks, a lot of the stuff there.
Well, and those I appreciated. I mean, the fact that he could high kick a lot, and the fact that he could jump up like that and basically kick some ass. So, but there are elements of this film that I enjoy, and some I disregard. Maybe. Well, let's look at the storyline before I get into all of that. I know my opinion somewhat is negative, but there are some positives that I'll probably relay throughout the film. So we have a U.S. Army captain by the name of Frank Dukes, and supposedly this is loosely based on some of the exploits of a real person by the name of Frank Dukes. And he has been trained in ninjutsu and under his sensei by the name of Sanso Tanaka, who's played by Roy Chiao. And I absolutely love that character actor playing this kind of Japanese man who, he had a young child of his own, and he wanted to bring him up in in his own upbringing. He wanted to pass down what he'd learned from his generations, and it was not to be, and it ended up being Jean-Claude Van Damme's character. So what did y'all think about the character of Sanso Tanaka?
Oh, he's a good mentor, kind of like your. Well, I mean, you had to have your mentors back in the day. I mean,
Yep.
you
Mr.
had some. You
Miyagi,
had some good ones. Yeah, Mr. Miyagi. That's the name I
Splinter.
was trying to go for. But yeah, and he was that type. I mean, I actually liked this character more than some of those because there was something about him that seemed more practical. He was an individual that left Japan because he was a conscientious objector. He didn't want to go to war, so he ended up leaving Japan. And that's kind of an interesting backstory of it, fleeing with it. He had a family of his own that he ended up losing because of that. And of course, he was trying to have another family since. So I really like that they spent some time on the backstory, which could be based on reality for all I know. Because of course there's always a little bit of reality in a potentially derived from true story one. So it's very possible that there could be some of that from there. I thought it was a good backstory.
Little info here. So that actor is Roy Chiao, and he played Lao She in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, what is happening is, I believe that the son of this Tanaka character has died, and so the captain has come back to kind of pretty much go to his funeral and pay his respects. And during this whole paying respects ritual, he comes to a decision of going to Hong Kong to play in this game of death. Basically, it's kind of like your martial arts version of a gladiator type setting, and an arena in which different fighters from different areas of the world or whatnot go up against each other and fight against each other to figure out who's like the top dog. So
Kumite. and
correct.
And of course the son's death, which happened actually when he was like in early adulthood, was what true, because the guy basically Jean-Claude Van Damme as a kid tried to, well, he was following peer pressure.
Yep.
And they were trying to steal this sword from him, and he ended up just like putting it back. And he said, well, I'm not going to report you for the cops, but you're going to basically be my son's training partner. And then when his son dies unexpectedly, they had finally grown close enough that Jean-Claude Van Damme was able to convince him to teach him the martial arts and pass it on as if he were his son.
That's right.
And he was going to the and he was doing the kumite after he had gotten to be after he had become a captain, all this stuff. He said, okay, I'm going to do the kumite to make you proud, just like the son had actually even said that once, like, I'm going to fight in the kumite to make my father proud. And so he's able to take his the Tanaka school lineage with him so that he can actually get an invitation to fight them, because it's not like you can't just get into the kumite, you have to be invited.
Well, yeah, and they do that with they show this with a bunch of flashback scenes where I believe he was with a group of characters to try to steal some weapons in their household, which we kind of skimmed over, and in order to teach him a lesson of not. Of not taking the sword or whatnot, he kind of indentured him into being his son's mentor. But going forward here, he ends up going into this battle with an American friend of his that he kind of meets up with, and this guy is like a mankind looking like dude. Um,
Yeah.
but
Or you could say an ogre, maybe.
yeah,
Yes.
and his name is Ray Jackson. He's another fighter who has entered into this ultimate game of, who's the best of the best. So, what do you think about this character of Ray Jackson, guys?
I love him. He's great.
Someone I'd want to have a beer with.
Oh yeah.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Mankind because I totally got a Mick Foley vibe from him.
Well, yeah.
Actually, in that game they play the karate game, which is a fairly old arcade game, but it's kind of hilarious watching them.
I was kind of hoping, and I knew that they wouldn't because the original Street Fighter game was not popular because, quite frankly, it really was not a good game. But I was in my head, I was making all these Street Fighter connections, and I was like, wouldn't it be funny if they were playing Street Fighter 1? But of course they would. Well, they weren't because, again, that first game, and I've played it, it's really not good. It's pretty terrible, but it's not so much about the game itself, but what it started. But nonetheless, I was like, that would have been funny. Well, and it also got me thinking because I remember in It Chapter 2, they actually were playing Street Fighter 1, and I was like, oh geez, someone actually played Street Fighter 1? Wow.
I've actually played it myself.
Yeah. Did you play it with the big, they had the big buttons, and if you hit the button at a certain level, like you had to hit it like either strong, medium, or hard in order to do the hard, medium, or light punches and kicks. It was it was janky as heck, but the concept was pretty cool. Like you slam your fist into it to do like a major attack. That was really cool.
Yeah, well, it's I mean, that's an interesting idea for sure, but it's I found that interesting, but also it sets up that scene sets up characters pretty quickly and definitively because you've got someone that, I mean, granted, if both of those guys who are obviously fighting for real, if they got put into a video game tournament with a bunch of nerds, they would undoubtedly get their asses handed to them because that's their form of discipline. But when going against each other, I think that in terms of character, it's very telling that, our dear Mick Foley wannabe, he has so much hubris that he just kind of assumes that he'll win just from his, sheer size and awesomeness and everything. But, he does not. And even from that early foreshadowing, he doesn't learn his lesson until it's too late. And it seems like by the end of it, despite having a bunch of boo-boos on his head, it looks like he's still not going to learn that lesson. So, but that is, although truthfully, that is very telling of character, and of the fact that a lot of people just don't change.
I guess what kind of endears me to this film the most is the fact that Frank Dukes is trained by Tanaka to fight any obstacle while blind as well. And it shows in the many different sparrings that he comes up against, especially with Chong Li. And Chong Li is an interesting character too. I mean, he's this buff, titty bouncing Japanese martial artist, and he's just like this big muscled teddy bear, So, but
I wouldn't have said a teddy. I wouldn't have said a teddy bear. I thought he was more like. Well, I was thinking more like, imagine if Akuma was not so like demonic and stoic and so like focused and everything. Imagine if you like got him really coked up, and that's what you would get of this guy. And not Chun-Li, but Chong-Li. And because Chun-Li, as we know, is very different.
He plays an excellent martial arts villain. I was kind of glad that he got the chance to shine in this. You got to see him, and you got to see him shine a little bit in Enter the Dragon, and a few other things. He's well known for playing the villain, but you can see a few where he's got a hero role. It's just kind of fun to watch it because he is really skilled.
Well,
and you can tell this.
This isn't his only role in a Jean-Claude Van Damme film. He was also in Double Impact as Moon. So,
and I'm not gonna lie. I only really like about 4 films from Jean-Claude Van Damme a lot, which that's saying something in of itself.
I personally am a fan of just about everything he did up until the press.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, see, for me, it's Kickboxer, Cyborg, Universal Soldier, and this. Everything else is okay.
For me, it's Cyborg, Time Cop, and Replicant. His science fiction adventures, and I guess you could say the Universal Soldier series, at least as far as the ones that have him in it.
Wait, Replicant, was that one of his direct-to-video movies?
I believe so, and he was a clone in that film, and a cloned alien or something like that, and it was wicked. But in any case, but this is pretty much his, his coming out film. I was looking at some of the things that he was a part of before this, and this is his breakout film.
Oh yeah.
As far as when him and his American friend get to Hong Kong, I love the fact that he can take and like explode that brick on the bottom of that pile of bricks. Right?
Yes.
What did y'all think about that?
I like the one what Ogre does at the later end of it, where he's like, pick a brick, any brick, and he's like, he breaks one, and he's like, see, no damage, like like that. And he just like, not damage. And he's like, oh yeah, and he just breaks it on his head.
Well, and of course there is a love interest in the film. There always seems to be in an action film, and her name is Janice. Janice, played by Leah Ayres, and her interaction is the fact that she's a reporter that is trying to get the scoop on this secret fight. So
she likes to do undercovers work.
But it does help that she is pretty. Yep. So what do you think about her character, guys?
She was basically Kim Basinger's Vicky Vale 1 year before Tim Burton's Batman came out, in terms of similar looks, similar kind of tenacity, similar, but I mean, that is sort of that female journalist stereotype that you see in movies, but nonetheless, I liked her fine. I mean, I think that she didn't really do a whole lot to stand out amongst similar types of female journalists that we see in movies, but I think that his relationship with her seemed to be suitable for, the kind of film that this is, even though it's not the most deep relationship in the world.
No, but there is an interesting interaction where apparently there is another fighter that I believe his name was Hassan. And he evidently was trying to get her to come up to his bedroom or lair, and she thought that he was, the man to essentially get her into the whole process, and she was not having any of it. But ultimately, he put it on a chance of a coin. Not a toss, but necessarily, if I can change this coin into this coin, you if I win, I get the girl. If you lose, you get the girl, basically. And it's interesting because I think this was another thing that his mentor taught him: the quickness of hand, the sleight of hand, and that's where this kind of played into play. What did you guys think of that little magic trick?
Karate Kid-like, in my opinion. I don't remember which came out first, but I always think of Karate Kid.
Karate Kid came out 4 years before this one.
And there's another one that I thought it reminded me of, which is Remo Williams. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that one, but another similar.
I am.
Heard of it, never seen it.
Very fun. If you like that sort of thing, I think you would like Remo Williams.
That stars the black character in Tremors, right?
It's a very fun tale. It's a good martial arts film, and I don't know. I have not watched it in years, but it's one that I still adore, at least from afar. Which one day I need to rewatch. I've got it sitting on my DVD shelf now.
Alrighty. So I know that there are quite a few sparrings in between the final fight, and obviously there are two agents that have been sent from the military because they can't afford to have their best dude like go into these fights, even though though from the onset, it's kind of as even here it said on IMDb he said he decides to leave the army to compete in this tournament. But I guess when you leave the army and you're all kinds of specialty in the army, they don't let you leave. What do you think about these two characters who have?
Well, first of all, they're totally in the right that he's there on Uncle Sam's dime and he's just kind of in dereliction of duty. So, I mean, that as much as it's about honor and everything, I mean, he does basically abandon his post. And, like, I mean, I think that's probably my least favorite thing about the film. Not that I don't like those characters, but because I'd have to look into the real story because apparently this guy was a real person.
And a real story for himself.
Yeah, well, but the point being that, it's one of those things where I don't know what the real story is insofar as like him doing that and on Uncle Sam's dime and having to have these people come after him to bring him back to base and everything. Because if that's the case, then it's like, well, that's kind of a dickish thing to do, number one. Number two, if I were his superiors, he'd probably get a court-martial, and it's, so, I mean, and it also just, like, when he gets to the point where, they're like, hey, it's like, I'll be, on the plane tomorrow, and they just kind of let him do his thing. It's like, no, you just give up? And I know that he could, kick their asses and stuff, but it's like, it just, to me, it seemed very, that I found that very hard to believe. Now, for all I know, that could very well have happened. For all I know, but it's. I was like, well, if that did indeed happen, then his superiors need to be court-martialed for not doing their jobs because you know, I'm a little like, if that happened under my watch, then I would be like,
Right.
you let him do what? And you
Yeah.
let him abandon his post to do what?
I
It just
imagine that these characters are more like babysitters for him when he was in
Oh
the army.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because when you think of someone who's like a special forces officer, and he is like your top soldier or whatnot, there's always someone trying to make sure that money is well spent. You know,
Yeah.
um, and to me, it's like these guys already know his shenanigans, know probably that ultimately, once he does what he needs to do, he will probably come back anyways. But they still have to come and do their officerly duty and at least track him down and make sure where the fuck he is and make sure he's not trying to kill himself and shit like that. And that's why they kind of had to use the muscle of the local soldiers, but they really didn't have that much power to begin with in Hong Kong.
well,
So
I mean that is a fair point because let's keep in mind because we were talking about this on the chat this last week. At this time, this was 1988. At that time, Hong Kong was still a British colony, but it was 1997. That was 9 years later. Got returned to the Chinese. But point being, it was in this weird in between place, and in either way you slice it, it is not an American. It wasn't an American colony. It wasn't an American territory. Nothing like that. So I mean, the fact that they're there at all, I'm sure that they're there at the behest of the British government at the time. But so you're right in the sense that their specific level of influence isn't as great as it would be if they were on American soil or if it was an American territory. But point is that nonetheless, I imagine that. Well, I'm thinking along the lines of, let's say, not a lot of people know this, but George Carlin served in the Air Force, and he got 3 court martials for rather petty offenses, falling asleep on guard duty, during a simulated combat mission or whatever, and not showing proper respect to a commissioned officer, and things like that were just more like petty offenses versus like leaving your post and forcing your superiors to chase you. And I'm like, that has got to carry some more weight. I mean, a dishonorable discharge, if nothing else, But for sure, I would think a court martial for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah,
in this
this dude.
yes.
This dude freaking went AWOL, and as far as I'm concerned, that's probably one of the most bothersome things about this movie. There are some things that do bother me about this movie that would not have bothered me as a first from Jean-Claude Van Damme, but more bother me as a later pattern in his films. And it's something I will talk about when we get to the last battle that he has with Bolo. But it's a terrible thing that goes on there. I mean, I really think that's really a sad thing about the movie, is that I think it could be better if they had left that part out.
Yeah, well, again, I don't know the real story though, because for all we know, that could have happened. In which case, then it's like, well, okay, blame the real people. But it's one of those things also where I do think you could say that was somewhat of a carryover from something that started under, say, Dirty Harry, and then especially took on full fruition in the 80s, as far as like the kind of thug cop, or the cop who bends the rules or breaks the rules, and yet his superiors don't fire him. They don't,
The Maverick
heavily
hero.
discipline him. Yeah, exactly. And yet one who still occupies some kind of official position of authority, and I think that was, in many ways, that was kind of something that started under Dirty Harry, and then in 71, and then it came into full fruition all throughout the 80s. And let me tell you, in real life, I've been in a lot of situations where you put one toe out of line and you get heavily disciplined, if not fired. And in fact, people will fire you over the most petty of offenses, let alone something serious. And especially these days, in very contentious times where everybody's got a cell phone camera and social media, and you can't just sweep it under the rug, and any of those kinds of like brotherhoods, like the police or like the military or whatever, the ties that bind are, in more and more danger of being exposed because of all that. And so therefore any kind of allegiances that could, in which one could successfully bend the rules, I think that doesn't really hold up these days, and it doesn't really bode too well retrospectively, because you're just like, well, why didn't this guy get a court martial? Because that seems like that's pretty blatantly in dereliction of duty.
Yeah.
I feel like the character of Chong Li and his sparring partners, those were a hell of a lot more brutal than the Jean-Claude Van Damme sparrings, and they were noticeably so. I mean, one guy he ended up like breaking his neck. The next guy, I think he broke his leg, and you could see the bones in his leg come out. What did you guys think of Chong Li's opponents?
Well, they got their asses kicked.
Yep.
Yeah. They were a way of showing off that this dude is serious. He's a bad guy. He's a bad dude, and he is the ultimate fight for our hero, so to speak. So they're
And
really there to show him off.
And you even have that history of he's never been defeated before, kind of a thing going on. So it's kind of like they want to horrify you before you even meet him, kind of a thing.
Well, and that was also a very classically 80s tactic of build up the bad guy into like this superhuman monster type person who has the buggy eyes and the bulging muscles and the this and that. That was very common back then, which in many ways, and not to get too far off topic, but you hear a lot about a lot of kind of infantilism in the culture, as far as like and a lot of that comes from a kind of regression towards simpler narratives of good versus evil, and of without a whole lot of nuance in there. And so what you'll find, these things tend to come in 30-year cycles, and right now we have a lot of people that look back on, well, the 80s, and then it's going to be the 90s, increasingly. But in the 80s especially, you saw this resurgence of these very kind of basic black and white kind of narratives like that. And as archetypical as they are, as primal as they are, as rooted in kind of simplistic reality as they are, it's something that you see echoed these days, and you see a reflection, a 30-year reflection of what people in the 80s, what they would have remembered from films like say in the 50s and before, because these things do tend to have a 30-year cycle to them. But I do think that in the case of this movie, it's not really trying to be anything greater than just a simple, straightforward martial arts film, in which case it works. But it's just more so that when you then mix it with something like the maverick hero who can get away with bending or breaking the rules, and his superiors will just kind of, oh shucks, that darn Fred Dukes or whatever. Is it Frank or Fred?
Frank.
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 When you just have them kind of shake their heads and like, oh, that darn Dukes, he did it again, it's one of those things where you see enough of that stuff and it does sort of reinforce this idea that our hero can basically get away with anything despite them not, being dutiful to their superiors, which that also does kind of beg the question of, because I say that on the one hand, then on the other hand, he is extremely dutiful to his master, and that's why he's doing it in the first place. So then it's like, well, he knows where his loyalties lie, number one, but also number two, it's to his mentor and his master and not to his country that he supposedly is serving. But again, they don't really place a whole lot of emphasis on that. It seems like his government's mostly there to provide something of a ticking clock and an adversarial force beyond his opponents. And it's just, again, I'd like to know the full story there, because I don't know if the real guy was more patriotic than that, but it seems like it's perfectly good and in fact very admirable to be loyal to one's master after having learned so much. But it's also like, well, you're possibly doing a greater disservice to, if you do indeed purport to be this agent of your government as you purport to be, you're doing a greater disservice by just leaving your government in the lurch like that. But again, that's kind of going beyond the scope of this rather simple, deliberately simple narrative, but it is something to think about if we're digging a little deeper.
Definitely. As far as the sparring partners of our captain here, Mr. Dukes, for the most part, he doesn't break a sweat or take off his shirt until this big, tall dude that kind of makes him have to take off his shirt. What do we think about that particular match?
Well, it's the classical, once the guys are bare-chested, then it's serious. It's the whole, it's very caveman-like, of course, which in terms of primal basic narrative, it works, because it resonates in the audience's subconscious, whether they realize it or not. Which there's a lot of kind of slow motion fighting in this, and you see every bead of sweat, every rippling man tit. You see
every one-eyed Van Damme.
Yeah, every constipated Van Damme face. You see every kind of Stretch Armstrong motion moment with him stretching himself out. Which one of my favorite lines, if not my favorite scene, where he's like, his friend is like, you gotta watch that because you might want to have kids someday, and that's exactly what I was thinking. And, there were a couple of moments that I was like, "Ooh, no kids for you," when people got their nether regions punched with maximum force and velocity.
Yeah.
Which ultimately is what that match kind of ended in a uppercut to the groin area. And he basically, I like that one because he basically wasn't falling, and he just pushed him lightly on the forehead, and he just kind of fell. But in any case, one of the things that I noticed, and you'll notice this in some of the Bruce Lee films, where Bruce Lee was in fact he would sound like fucking Rafiki from Lion King. Whenever he did his,
Rafiki, yeah.
Whenever he did his.
I think I just went deaf, David.
But you could hear Van Damme do some of this kind of screaming whenever he did a specific move or something like that, and that to me can be, even though I know that you're kind of taught to use like all of your um, uh, vocal cords to emphasize some of your moves. Um, to me, I can kind of find that somewhat distracting. What about you guys?
Well, what they tell you in actual martial arts, and I know this because like my brother took taekwondo, and this is pretty common. Two things that they'll tell you is one, breathe. You know, that's really really important, and not just remembering to breathe in general, but just like uh, timing one's breathing with what one is doing. You know, that's all very important. But two, kind of in conjunction with that, which is the I don't know, is it a sensei in Taekwondo? I can't remember what they've, because sensei is a Japanese word and Taekwondo I think is Korean, but whatever
It's Korean.
yeah, well the master, you know, what he would say was more power, you know, that you know, the letting out the cry of whatever that apparently contributes to it on top of proper breathing. And so I'm sure partially that is a psychological thing, but I think it does have a physiological component to it as well. Now, a particular person's cry is, of course, very special to them, and you know, Bruce Lee will sound different than anyone else doing that sort of thing. So it's very individualized, but it does have its roots in reality there. You know, and pretty well documented reality within martial arts itself, and that's obviously not the same as like more Western styles of fighting. Like I'm thinking of like boxing or you know something like that. Which boxing is very you know regulated and very obviously points driven and you know form driven, which is not to say that martial arts isn't, because it is in its own way, but martial arts was also derived from more of a means of survival, and then boxing is more explicitly a sport, and you know has that sort of you know civilized veneer to it.
Well, ultimately, it comes down to this final battle of um, the wits and talents of both the brutalityness of Chong Li and we find the fact that Chong Li is in fact doing things illegally. In fact, during his last match, the what is it? The referee, the Chinese referee, noticed that something was wrong. In fact, right before this match began, and which is why I think the council members and the audience kind of turned their faces to the wall right before they began the final match. What
he
did
killed somebody.
Yeah,
And he killed somebody not just in a way that was like he killed them in the fight. He basically killed the dude when he was down and out. He
Yeah,
already won. He just killed him. So yeah, they were just showing like, nah, dude, that's like disrespectful as hell.
That's why it's why it's a blood sport.
yeah. Well, and you could hear that in the booing of the crowd, and I immediately again sort of two Supermen going at it kind of movie 3 years before this one. I was put in the mind of Rocky IV with if he dies, he dies, you know, and that again that's even more archetypical and to a kind of almost self-parodying degree with the soundtrack and the training montage and that kind of stuff, even more so than this. But you know, again, similar era, similar kind of archetypical two kind of man mountains going at it, that sort of thing. This one
And
Go ahead.
oh, I was just saying, and on a side note, since you brought up Rocky IV, I just want to say happy birthday to Dolph Lundgren.
And this one also had a great soundtrack, although Rocky IV, as utterly ridiculous as it is, it has one of the best soundtracks to any of the Rocky films and any like sports film ever. It's just a killer soundtrack. But that's part of what kind of carries both movies through, is that they have this very, not just the 80s soundtrack, but it's very, again, it taps into that kind of primal uh, feeling. And I think that definitely is a point in the movie's favor, because believe me, I'm a big fan. I'm sort of I feel like I'm talking down on primal narratives or whatever, which I'm really not, because I actually tend to love primal narratives very much. It's just more so, I didn't really think of it a whole lot deeper than that until I saw the title cards and stuff at the end, where it talked about how it was based on a real person and that this person did X, Y, and Z, has this many world records, blah, 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 which, again, I don't know the degrees of difference, but I was sort of like, well, that real person sounds pretty damn impressive. And yeah, big time. So again, I don't know how much this does or doesn't stray from the truth, but I know that based on that information, I'm like, well, even beyond a movie, and a good film in and of itself, for what it is, which again, it does fit a lot of those kind of 80s, cheese-tastic action movie slash sports slash martial arts movie tropes. It fits a lot of those, but at the same time, what something like Rocky IV, what that doesn't have is a real life person underneath it all. And it was to the point where I was like, well, now I want to see a documentary about the real guy, because the real guy sounds really damn impressive. And
although allegedly the Kumite, there's I've read something about like how it's never been proven that there's actually been any real Kumite matches.
Yeah.
So it's possible that he was just making it up.
It was. I mean, that's also, that's why a lot of this stuff, especially in the pre-internet age, like, anything historical like that, you have to judge things differently in terms of how much of it was self-reported, how much of it had independent verification, and then the further back in time you go, the harder it is to.
And how much the film exaggerated the truth.
That's well, and how much did the person himself or herself, or whoever it was, whoever was in it telling the narrative initially, how much did they distort their own story? Because, like, I'm thinking of Lawrence of Arabia, of course, one of the best films ever made, based on a real person, which for the most part it hits the facts fairly well. There are little deviations here and there. The spirit of it is most definitely romanticized, and that is largely due to how the real T.E. Lawrence saw himself in his book 10 Pillars of Wisdom. So for all we know, which again, this is coming from someone that has not, delved in deeper, but for all we know, the stories in which the stories that people tell about themselves, and the stories that that the narratives that they weave, they could take on a more romanticized feeling than the facts might necessarily make you think. Or in some cases, certain people kind of get unfairly made into heroes, like Custer or Columbus or whatever, or they get perhaps unfairly maligned relative to what the true severity of their badness might have been. So yeah, I would love to know more about the real person, because based on the information we got, it seems like he did a whole lot.
One of the things that I thought was a defining moment in this, and it goes into the formula really, if you think about it, for a Jean-Claude Van Damme film thereafter, was, of course, when Ogre fought Bello. It was if you noticed all the fights up until that point, they just basically hit him and he'd be like, "Yeah, that doesn't even, I don't even feel it." But you could see where like Ogre or Jackson, whatever, hits him, and he's like, he really feels it. It rocks him. But then he's just like, I'm celebrating my victory, even though he hadn't beaten him yet, and
Well,
just
yeah.
getting really badly hurt. And this becomes a trope later on in a lot of Jean-Claude Van Damme films. But that was, to me, it was just such a sad thing because I just I wanted Ogre to kick his ass, really.
Well, you gotta love that not only does he not learn his lesson at the end, but also that so Jean-Claude Van Damme, as we know, is Belgian, which that always struck me as weird that in a lot of his movies that he was sort of lumped into these kind of all-American roles, including Street Fighter, where he plays the quintessential all-American character through the eyes of the Japanese, of course, Guile, and yet he's got a really thick Belgian accent.
Same with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Kinda, yeah. But then what you got here is, which I don't know what the real Frank Dukes. I don't know what his story was.
He's from Canada, actually.
Canada, okay.
Yep.
So hey, for all we know, he could have been trying to do a French Canadian accent. But
There you
point is, the character who is undeniably American, quite literally in his looks and in his personality and just in the mold that he fits. He also succumbs to that classical heroic hubris, but also the American hubris of just thinking that because he is who he is, that he's, of course he's going to win. There's no question. And that's of course that's a very kind of classical Greek tragedy formula there of the person who's so full of hubris that he doesn't see his own tragic end coming. Although he is quite humorous, and I think he was my favorite character because he's very much at home in this kind of slightly over the top world, but also he has very funny lines that do kind of give the sense that the screenwriters and the filmmakers, that they are aware of what they're making and they're having fun with it, which that's kind of why I'm like, well, I'm diving into it a bit more in depth and academically than perhaps they necessarily intended. And part of that is the fact that you do have this character who is so full of his own hubris that even after being in the hospital with some bad head injuries and stuff, he still doesn't learn his lesson, really. And I'm like, that is very well, I assume very self-aware, but also, isn't that just like life, though? I mean, I think most people tend to not have a whole lot of self-awareness, and most people tend not to make the big sweeping moments of character arcs or big sweeping self-realizations that movies often portray them as having, because, well, it's drama, and people generally in the course of drama, they tend to have that Aristotelian catharsis and all that stuff. But I do find in real life that people tend to blunder a lot and tend to not really learn from their mistakes.
Okay. So apparently, the real Dukes was in fact a fight choreographer for this film. He was also a fight choreographer for Lionheart from 1990 and Only the Strong in 1993. He also co-authored the film The Quest along with Jean-Claude Van Damme, but that he sued Van Damme for breach of contract over the film, but he lost the suit in 1998. Apparently, he also lost a lawsuit against Soldier of Fortune because his claims of falsifying his military and the CIA service that he He claims that he was. There is evidently no record of Senso Tanaka, and apparently his tournament, that his secret martial arts tournament that this is based on, there is no documentation of this as well. So even though this is kind of what it's kind of based on, so much of this is believed to be a fantasy that he claims he was part of.
So he could have just been a big fat liar.
Yeah, yes, he
He
could
could have been. Well, yeah. Apparently, the director of Central Intelligence at the time, Robert Gates, he denies that he has ever worked with the CIA at all.
Well, there you go. Then,
So,
then fuck him.
Yeah.
Him and Rudy.
Now the other thing that I wanted to look
way to
at,
go! You got me all excited for the real person's record, and then you fucked it up.
I wanted to throw out one thing, and I wanted to say this about Jean-Claude Van Damme films, and I learned this at an earlier age, and it always bothered me, which is why I don't really care as much for them, is that most of the films that he is in follow a specific formula. And if you really look at this, you can see it, especially in this film. You've got a guy, you've got that he's a tough guy. He has a love interest. He has some sort of he's got to avenge somebody plot. In this case, it would be Jackson. Something happens. The bad guy screws over X individual. They get into their fight. He does well at first, but then the bad guy beats him down. And then after the bad guy beats him down for a time, something inspires him. He comes back from what should be a total loss and then beats the bad guy down after this sudden inspiration. And this is the formula that you see in almost every Jean-Claude Van Damme film from this one onward.
Mhm.
I can almost guarantee you, I've seen a lot of his films, and this is why it's a lot harder for me. It has to have a lot more to it, like Cyborg. If we ever cover that one, the enemy, to me, he is not the interesting one in Cyborg. The bad guy is the interesting one in Cyborg. He's the one that I'm most fascinated by. Universal Soldier, again, Dolph Lundgren's character, again, the one that most fascinates me. Even in this one,
Street
Bolo,
Fighter, Julia.
like I say, it seems like in his films also another trait is that the bad guys tend to feel more interesting than the main characters.
Well, bad guys are almost always more interesting than good guys in fiction if the bad guy has been written correctly. Because if the antagonist is not interesting, then it's probably not a good story to begin with. And usually bad guys are more interesting because they tend to be very certain about their goals and their motives and everything. And they usually, the best villains tend to be the ones that have good arguments and are persuasive and all that stuff. But in this case, again, it's very kind of deliberately archetypical construction, which is not bad. It's just, and I wouldn't necessarily expect a whole lot else from, this kind of story. But at the same time, I would be curious if you could kind of have your cake and eat it too on that front, which I guess in some ways that's something like what the Matrix is trying to do, because that tried to have a very kind of morally complex story within the framework of, well, sci-fi action, but then also a lot of martial arts. Like I've seen it, on the list of best martial arts films, and I think he would be remiss if you didn't include it in martial arts films in any kind of list of that. So you probably can have a narrative that still checks off a lot of those boxes, but you know,
And again,
it's
I feel like if you take the formula that I've laid out and you put it under any of them, this is the one thing I find is a weakness. I think it's not so bad here because again, it's one of the early times, one of the first times it's used it. But I feel like that repetition, where of almost any Jean-Claude Van Damme movie feels the same in many ways. And
And
that's really where the weakness is.
I think that's kind of where I'm coming from too. It's like you start seeing some of the same thing.
But you
Oh,
can't apply it you cannot apply it to this one because it's the first one.
yeah.
but I can say that later in his career, when he starts to look exactly like Jim Varney in as Ernst, you know, at least in facial features. To me, that's what Jean-Claude Van Damme kind of reminded me of later in life, later in his career. For some reason, you can picture Jim Varney in a Van Damme picture.
Well, he becomes more of a caricature of himself in the later career because he knows that. He knows it's like it's his way. Like JVCD, good example of a Jean-Claude Van Damme film for later life. Um, as you know, that one's kind of depressing actually. Come to think of it,
That was a great movie.
because it is what it is. But it is, but it does do a lot of that whole like making fun of the whole Jean-Claude Van Damme narrative.
It was a deconstruction.
Yeah, so that was the thing, and that's one of the things I see as the later, because a lot of his films were just basically copies with different window setting up until that point. So I kind of like the introspective that you get in the later films, and I mean later as in like after his disappearance and then reemergence again.
Yeah, he didn't have a full standing career like Steven Seagal has, though B grade Steven Seagal has become.
Yeah.
But you know,
I put Van Damme in a match between the two of them.
a lot of action stars have gotten to the point of being like in every movie that they possibly can, you know. But he was not as prevalent as some of the other characters, you know. That
Now, we'll say this: I would definitely bet money on Jean-Claude Van Damme to beat Steven Seagal today, but it's only because Steven Seagal is in such terrible
Even
shape
back,
physically.
but apparently even back then, Seagal and Van Damme didn't like each other, and
No.
I think it was Seagal who was trying to challenge Van Damme to a fight, and then when Van Damme took him up on it, he wussed out.
Well, it's because Steven Seagal is completely full of shit in every possible way. Like
And he's a storyteller himself.
he's not remotely anything that he claims to be, you know, and in fact he's kind of a supporter of dictators and, you know, just like this garbage human as far as I can tell.
Well, I don't care for him as a personal human being from his for his thing, but I did like Under Siege.
As opposed to an impersonal human being.
Well, most actors are impersonal human beings to us, really, if you think about
That's
it.
true. That's true.
We try to we it's kind of like a YouTube personality. You kind of have this fake sense of familiarity with your actor as you get to know them through the movies, but you don't know them. You don't know them personally. Well, some people you might know personally, but many of these people you don't know personally. So we don't know who they are or what they do. We can only know them through their personas. And that's just how it is. I mean, for me, I like some Steven Seagal's movies. I like some of the environmental pieces like Fire Down Below, or the like I say, or the Under Siege movies.
Under Siege was great.
But Jean-Claude Van Damme, again, I love him for some of his stuff. Like I loved the Bloodsport. I loved Universal Soldier, Cyborg, because they're fairly unique narratives. Unfortunately, applied to a very old school, overused formula, but still, it's still kind of cool. I just like I say, I have that love for that. Not, I'm kind of sad. It looks like Jake probably won't be with us tonight, but I'm sure that he could agree with that. I don't know. Did any of y'all actually grow up with that? I can't remember if any of y'all actually grew up with Van Damme. Am I the only one that did? Sounds like a lot of you came to him later in life.
I
Go ahead.
I gravitated towards him eventually, like bits and pieces over time. It's like I know that he was a lot of what a lot of martial arts type action films that people gravitated towards, but I did not exactly have any of his films on hand to watch until I got into his science fiction movies that ended up being on some of the TNT stuff, and I liked the different action scenes from Bloodsport. But I did not grow up with it, so I guess I don't have as much nostalgia for it as I do like films like Big Trouble in Little China.
I mean,
It's just gonna be next week.
Grant, I was well aware of who Van Damme was when I was a kid. Although I didn't really start watching his movies until I was a teen. I didn't really start watching his movies until I was a teenager. But I'm something of a connoisseur of cheese and trash. So I definitely appreciate. I appreciate his. Oh, what is that sound?
Yeah, I don't know. It's freaking me out.
But, as someone who was like something of a connoisseur, like I said, a connoisseur of cinematic cheese and trash, I definitely appreciate. I came to appreciate. It was something about later, like I guess Van Damme definitely appealed to like more to, like Dave was saying, if you grew up with him like as a kid, whereas I kind of came in a little later as a teenager when he was already doing direct to video movies.
Here too.
But like I said, as someone who likes who enjoys crap, I kind of appreciate it from that kind of angle. I was impressed with his martial arts. Although, actually, I did see Street Fighter a little earlier than that, but only because it was Street Fighter. And I did think as a martial artist, he was very impressive. Not quite, Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan, whom I was more into.
And I was a teenager, like an early teen, during his prime, which was. See, like I say, it's a very different thing. It's that nostalgia factor that I can claim just because of it.
See,
I can't.
For Seagal, on the other hand, I can tell you right now, Seagal. Him. Okay, I will say right now, Mad TV ruined him for me. I cannot watch his movies. I cannot watch any of his movies and not think about Will Sasso as Seagal.
Yeah, I remember Mad TV a little bit, but when I'm thinking of martial arts stuff that I grew up with Kung Fu, the TV series, a lot. I came at it with watching Chuck Norris in a lot of his earlier films. And Steven Seagal in some of his earlier films. So, I guess the random martial arts film that I would come across, like to me, Masters of the Flying Guillotine was one of the first martial arts films that I had ever, the true martial arts, and so on and so forth. And then House of Flying Daggers and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, some of the more modern ones as far as that it goes. But that's the Van Damme was within my realm of watching, but it wasn't as prominent as some of those others.
Oh yeah, understood. And again, that's the thing is everybody has their different introduction to people, and it does depend. I mean, Dane, I know you've talked to yourself in the past about nostalgia's influence over one's perception, and that again that applies just as well here as it does anywhere else.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, it's I'm trying to think. So I don't really have any nostalgia for a lot of the action stars that a lot of people grew up with because, well, my parents wouldn't have let me watch them and that sort of stuff. But I was also growing up with classic films and stuff, so my frames of reference are a bit skewed relative to most people. But what I've learned about a lot of action stars is that they're basically like the male versions of divas. They're they tend to be very kind of full of attitude, a lot of like kind of strutting and preening, posturing, just entitled bullshit. And so I may like action films, to whatever extent, or martial arts films, but I don't have a whole lot of love for the action star as like a role model or anything because, well, generally my heroes are the ones who are behind the camera, but also I just don't really identify with that kind of attitude. But in this case, I mean, it's not to say that, that they can't still do a good job at what they do. I just, it's one of those things where would I necessarily want to, I always ask myself, like, who would I want to work with theoretically, in the future? And, somebody like that would be pretty low on my list, I think, because I would rather work with somebody that is more cooperative, but also be more willing to do more unusual things. And especially like 80s, 90s, like those action stars, like they were the ones that commanded the box office in a way that they don't now. Nowadays, it's all the brand that commands the box office. In those days, it was you went to see the Stallone film or the Schwarzenegger film or whatever. And nowadays, you go to see whatever franchise it is. That's the real star of the film. And on the one hand, it's like, well, that does give the corporate suits more power than they already have. But also, number two, you have the idea of those stars having even more of an inflated ego than they might have otherwise. And nowadays, it's more that they're kind of, whatever I'm trying to say, they're a cog in the machine more than they might have otherwise been.
Jake, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Glad we got you.
How about your first perspective of Bloodsport before we get into your nostalgia of this film?
Nostalgia? Huh?
I don't know if it is nostalgia. Some of us have it, and some of us.
Well, as I have said before, I have never been a particularly big fan of Jean-Claude Van Damme. I've seen a few of his films, not a large number. I think Brandon showed me Cyborg. Was that the one you showed me?
Oh, I definitely would have showed you Cyborg.
Yeah, it was all right. I did enjoy him in Expendables 2, I think it was. And so there have been a couple, and he had that one random Friends appearance and whatever. But I
this was one that I've known about for many years, and it was always kind of, I guess I'll watch it one day. And I did watch it for this, not thinking I would get to join this discussion, and then technical difficulties caused a rescheduling, and so now I can just talk on this one. This was definitely a first viewing. I was actually surprised at how much I did enjoy it. It's not high art, but I actually did enjoy it to a fair degree. Van Damme himself was kind of an amusing role, and Ogre was kind of started off as a jerk, but you came to love him, and he had a couple other fun little bits. There were a couple of potential cringe moments from the general 80s treatment of anything Asian. And there were a couple cringe moments from some of the moves that were used. But overall, not too bad. It was good. It was pretty decent action flick, I thought.
Dane was talking about some of the actions stars were not really his cup of tea.
Right.
Or say that it was the people behind the film that were more his heroes. What about you as far as action characters go? What were some of the people that you grew up with?
See, I never really got into the whole. Brandon will know what I'm talking about. The whole bro force.
If you think action star, who is the first person you think of?
Well, when I was growing up, I probably would have thought of Steven Seagal and or Chuck Norris. Those were probably the ones, like in our house, that would have been the widely thought of, widely considered. I don't think I saw any Van Damme films growing up. I'm not sure that I saw much from Jackie Chan growing up. I don't think I saw much from Stallone, really. There was a little bit of Schwarzenegger, but honestly, the one that I remember from my childhood was Kindergarten Cop. So not exactly your staple action flick.
No.
And for a while there, before he turned into a parody of himself, I was actually a fan of Seagal. We actually went to the movies to see Fire Down Below, and I do still love that one. That's a quality film.
See, I told y'all that he liked Fire Down Below.
Yeah, but we need to talk about one day. But when it comes to the action, like I did grow up on Karate Kid, and that was like for me, that was like my main action flick growing up was Karate Kid Part 2, and then as I got older, one of the other movies franchises that I believe. I know we went to see the second one, which I will always regret going to the theaters for this piece of trick. But I can't remember if we went to the theaters for the first Mortal Kombat, but I know, yeah. But in watching this one, there was that moment where I was like, holy crap, Mortal Kombat ripped that off, didn't they? And I was right.
Well, we kind of touched on the fact that Mortal Kombat might have been a precursor. Well, not a precursor.
No. They were heavily influenced by.
They were heavily influenced by either this movie or I was even going so far as back to saying like even Master of the Flying Guillotine had elements of an arena type of to the death kind of matches type of thing. So to me,
Well, and also, I brought up that this film, to me, like this evoked Street Fighter a lot more, just because that it was more grounded in reality. But um, yeah, and also just I recognized a lot more in the way of different fighting styles and stuff. But Mortal Kombat in general, is derived from the Enter the Dragon kind of tournament fighter genre, but then also Mortal Kombat, I think, derives possibly even more from Big Trouble in Little China stylistically, and this one I noticed a lot of connections to Street Fighter, but there's you could easily see why these would be so influential.
Well, this one had the blatant reference. I mean, the thing that triggered it for me was seeing him do that splits nut punch that Johnny Cage does. And then I had never realized, I'd never thought about this, but I saw the trivia that said that Johnny Cage pretty much was based on Van Damme's performance in this film. And I'm like, okay, that's a direct, I could say it, you could call it a ripoff or an homage, whichever way you want to look at it. And so that was a very explicit reference, but I do agree that Street Fighter was no doubt influenced as well, and that there are some similarities there.
Well, we referenced the fact that Mortal Kombat originated as a Jean-Claude Van Damme video game.
No, and of course the movie itself resembles a video game in
some ways.
A good tournament arc, and it's sad that we can't have Mo with us because he could talk about Dragon Ball and their tournament arc. But that's the thing, a good tournament arc is very video game like. I mean, to me, I had always mixed feelings. I mean, it sounds like I was like a worshiper of Jean-Claude Van Damme, but of course I really wasn't. Matter of fact, in my mid-teens, I hated Van Damme because, to me, I always considered Bruce Lee the true master of martial arts, and Van Damme's little dance ballet style martial arts was not appropriate and did not go on. And again, I have gained more appreciation these days. But still would disagree with many people that used to say that Jean-Claude Van Damme could easily beat Bruce Lee in a fight, which I heard a lot during high school, which turned me off to Van Damme even more, because I know that Bruce Lee in his prime would easily put down Van Damme in his prime, because Bruce Lee's style was purely martial arts. There might be some bases outside, but it's mainly martial arts, where Jean-Claude Van Damme has adapted more of a dance into martial arts.
Yeah, I think Bruce Lee has birthed the way for a lot of martial artists to be. I mean, when you think of a godfather of martial arts, everyone points to the almighty Bruce Lee. So I think that when you think of the martial arts kung fu capability, you kind of do that comparison with the different styles that Bruce Lee did to the different styles that Van Damme might have done, to Chuck Norris, to Steven Seagal, and you kind of have to.
And that's the thing, though, if you look at it, and this is something that eventually, when we cover the raid, I'm going to be touching on, is that Bruce Lee looked at the Chinese way of doing it and said, no, this is wasteful, this is stupid, this is not very realistic, and altered it to be more realistic, whereas Jean-Claude Van Damme kind of moved backwards towards that martial arts opera style of Chinese theater.
You got to admit, though, like it kind of sounds like the idea that using something more dance-like or whatever makes it a lesser art in some way. And I would definitely say that I would beg to differ on that. One, because of the extremely high level of physical training one needs to be a particularly skilled dancer. And also, if you look at, there's at least one martial art that grew directly out of dance that, from what I understand, is pretty kick-ass in the right, you can't really say hands so much as feet, and that's capoeira. That one can definitely be something to, but if you're talking like pure channeling it into pure force or whatever, I could see how that would be, to some people's mind, the purer or the more effective way of doing it. Yeah.
Well, let's bring us back to the final battle scene, where we get Chong Li pitted up against
that dude was a jerk,
Frank Dukes. What did you think of his brutality moves?
He was just a jerk. It's like
dirty.
Well, and he loved the fact that the audience was cheering for him each time. It's like he was egging them on to cheer his name.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, we see Jean-Claude Van Damme basically kind of kick his ass at first, where he was basically using the referee Chinese guy to hide from him for a moment there. He was like putting him up against Van Damme, and it almost looked like he was like, "Don't kick me, like kind of a thing. And he basically leaped over that guy and kicked him, and but that's when we realized that Chong Li had this pill that eventually, once it went into powder form, he threw into Van Damme's eyes and blinded him.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you guys think of that? The final, this finality, that the fact that he was blinded.
There's a cheetah in the ring.
What do you think, Dane, of that? Those moments where he was blinded.
He could he have made his eyes bug out any wider? I don't know if he could have. But he had to use the force. He had to fight like a blind man, and all that kind of stuff.
What about you, Brandon? What do you think of those blinding moments? Brandon?
Oh, no. But I don't know. I will pass on that moment. I just don't know.
What about you, Forrest? What did you think of those blinding moments of his final fight?
I mean, definitely added to the I guess the suspense of the final match. Even though it's predictable, it's a very predictable movie.
Yeah.
He's going to win, but still, there's that that oh shit moment. Is he gonna take it? Is he gonna be able to take him down? No, I think
but do you if it's never been done before?
Right.
Right. So ultimately, he ends up bringing himself into a center, kind of a thing, bringing his thoughts back to his master Tanaka, so to speak, because we get a few flashback scenes of him and his training, and then he opens his eyes, and it's like, I know the move to do next, and it's that slow motion raise up of his high kick, and
Mhm.
What do you guys think of the final blow?
I mean, it's a typical Jean-Claude Van Damme staple. I mean, it's that whole opera cycle. When he blinds him, that's the point where the bad guy starts beating on him, and you feel like there's no hope. And then you've got the inspiration, which is that flashback to his training against the blindness that then has him come back. And then suddenly the bad guy is powerless before the hero's might and hero-ness. And he ends up just beating him just because he's a hero.
Well, that basically is the gist of it, and ultimately he ends up apparently going back with his army agent dudes, and I do like the fact that the reporter lady, she does that whole clasping of hands thing in respect, kind of see him off. But just real quick, Jake, what did you think about the reporter, a lady, Janice?
What did I think about her?
Yeah.
Well, she was kind of the obligatory love interest character. I'm not sure that she really
Served a purpose.
I'm not sure that she served a purpose, but I'm not sure that she really stood out extraordinarily to me.
Okay.
Hey, her undercovers work was excellent.
Yeah.
Right. She banded with the other dudes in the Chinese policia. And then of course, then she ultimately ended up being on his side. Like that was like a total turn of events. But yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the music here.
I will put it right now that I have Fight to Survive on my iTunes.
Oh yeah.
And I listen to it while I work out.
That's got to be like the ultimate 80s cheese-tastic, but ultimate like fight mix right there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And I liked the definite mix of styles and whatnot. I mean, you had your 80s hair band, metal music throughout. Let's see. Yeah, Fight to Survive, which was performed by Stan Bush, and On My Own, Alone, also by Stan Bush, and then of course Steal the Night by Michael Bishop. So those, I guess, were the three songs that were performed on the film, and I think they definitely did go hand in hand with the film. What about you guys?
Oh, it wouldn't be the film without it. I mean, that's just there. I have Fight to Survive memorized. That's just how often I heard it. It's just that good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what about the special effects in the film? What do we think about the if there were any special effects? I don't think there were really anything CGI.
You'd have to use. I would say that when we're talking about martial arts mayhem, we really have to not think about it as special effects as much as choreography.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because when you think about it, all of these, when it comes to this one, or even when we hit our final awesome film, Enter the Dragon, it's all about choreography at the end of the day, as you get to hear in White Christmas by Danny Kaye. But the idea basically is that I mean, to me, I thought that you got to incorporate a lot of these different styles. I loved the way that they did this because, unlike a lot of the other films, they really incorporated a lot of different styles. You got to see a lot of showcases of different characters and different fights that made this into more than just the typical Jean-Claude Van Damme schlock that you got later on. And to me, that was excellent. I thought the choreography was really good. Even Jean-Claude Van Damme, his early fights, you got to see almost that Bruce Lee mentality where you saw the minimal thing. Like the first fight, they talked about how quickly he dispatched of him, and that was the idea, that realism of the fight, that it's not going to be forever. That you save the longer fight for the final boss. And that's a concept that Bruce Lee himself mented, and that's an awesome thing.
Oh yeah, I think that at least in the sense of the sparring matches that we get, I think that they had enough of the different styles. And I think one of my favorite different styles was the one that he was a man of color, crouching down on the floor, and he just wouldn't get up. You know, he just kept crouching and lurching to the side.
Oh.
And then he just bear hugged by the big giant Asian dude. So. Did anyone else have a particular character that they liked that was within the tournament?
Actually, I like the Muay Thai guy. I always thought he was pretty cool. Well, and if you think about it, he was one of the tougher fighters in there because he made it to the last day. He was in the last group. I mean, he was tough. That dude was kicking, and as Apachai would say, and Kenichi's strongest disciple, Muay Thai is for killing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So ultimately, let's think about favorite scenes, everyone. Unless anyone else has something to talk about the choreography. Dane, was there anything about the choreography that you wanted to say anything about?
I mean, it seemed like it was done well with sufficient force and everything. To where it was believable, and it seemed like they were really fighting each other. But I particularly liked the usage of slow motion. I think that it was able to, you got to see, it was kind of the opposite of what you would see with a fight nowadays, where you don't really see a whole lot of it. It is just a lot of shaky cam, quick cuts. This is kind of the opposite, where you really see every punch and kick up close to where you really buy the weight of it. And so that is very effective. As far as favorite scenes, I think the one that leaps to mind is where he's all stretched out in the hotel room or whatever, and he's like, you might want to watch that. You might want to have kids someday. And because I totally thought that same thing.
Oh,
Okay. And that was one of your favorite moments?
Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Jake? Was there a favorite moment in this film for you? If you could take one from it.
I'm not really sure. I mean, I don't know that there was anything I would really call a standout moment for me.
Okay.
I thought there were a lot of good moments, but I can't really single out one.
Okay. What about you, Brandon? Is there a specific moment or favorite moment that you would take from this?
Oh, I gotta love the video game scene where he introduces himself to Jackson. It just
Oh
something
yeah,
about that scene is always entertaining to me. Watching them as they're controlling the characters, and it's a relatively old game, but I've played it myself. It's a difficult game to do, and it's just kind of funny. I just like that whole thing.
I
Very
forgot
charming
about that. That
everything.
was fun.
Huh. I guess one of the things. This was one of the few films featuring scenes filmed inside Kowloon walled city before its destruction.
Right.
Oh wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, I actually love that. And one thing I also wanted to just make as a final point for me is that Hong Kong scene like this is something that, as we've discussed a little bit, is a rarity now because Hong Kong is very different these days. Whereas back then, Hong Kong was a part of the UK at one point, and it was during this. So we see a very different Hong Kong than we see today. And that's something rare, and it's just kind of cool to see that.
I would have to say that my favorite scene would have to be the part in the training where he is tied to different ends and bound in a specific way, where he's got to raise himself up on his feet just to uproot the one post from his master Naka. And the fact that it shows this much strength, that was a very powerful scene for me. As far as his training went, it was the most strain that you saw him go through his training. To me, I don't know about you guys.
Very cool scene, very memorable.
What
Actually,
about you, Forrest?
Great favorite scene.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. I do have a favorite scene, and then one aspect of a scene that I just found very funny. So favorite scene, probably the montage when the tournament montage playing to Fight to Survive. It was probably just like seeing the different martial arts styles and the choreography combined with the music and the editing. What that was really, I really thought that was good. Actually, really enjoyed that. But just going back to like when he's a kid and he breaks into Tanaka's home to steal the sword. This is just funny as a sports fan. He's got a New York Giants jersey on, but he's wearing a San Francisco Giants cap. I guess like I know they're both they're both Giants, and that the San Francisco Giants used to be the New York Giants baseball team, but I guess I guess it's that little it's like for me as a sports fan, it's like confused much.
I had a question now. Dave, you had talked about how you were not as big a fan of Jean-Claude Van Damme as others, and that this film also had a lot of detractors for you when we were getting ready to start. What were those things? I mean, I was curious because I know you mentioned it at the beginning, but you never actually elaborated.
I didn't exactly elaborate because I wanted to get started on the discussion, but my feelings on Van Damme are kind of neutral as far as his fighting goes. I know that he was a big, manly man kind of action a hero, or shall I say, martial artist. But from what I've seen of Van Damme, he has a lot of stances, and to me, they were not as well flowing as some of the other martial artists action heroes that I have seen, and maybe this kind of didn't exactly want me to see anything else of his because of these stances. Because I don't know if it's the way that he does them. Maybe it's just so weird from the normal martial arts that I'm used to. And maybe it's just I haven't had as much experience watching some of his films. So whenever I think about him, it's I'll just see that when I want to see it. Okay, kind of a reaction. And it's not that I'm not into action films or anything like that. I very much enjoy anything that involves a lot of violence, to be honest. And the bloodier, the better, But it's to me, I don't know. Something has put me off from wanting to see some of his earlier efforts, and maybe it's just because I was as a child, I was told, what to watch and what not to. And growing up as a teenager, and then when I finally got out on my own, living on my own, is when I started to, explore more martial arts horizons and discovering like some of the older martial arts films, and learning as I went along which actors did which films, and to me, I don't know, Van Damme, he was always on my horizon, but not quite there in front of me to watch. And I started collecting many of his films and just never sat down and watched them until now. So I am glad that I did finally see Bloodsport, but I guess I kind of missed out on some of the nostalgia going with it. But I did enjoy the music and the choreography, and for some reason, I did enjoy the main antagonist in here, especially when Van Damme made him say that word that supposedly was like a final commitment of defeat. So I guess I'm still kind of trying to figure out why I didn't want to watch any of Van Damme's films as prevalently as some of you other Van Damme films out there. So maybe I just missed out on the whole guy mentality. Oh, let's just see some dude kick some ass and maybe kill a few people, kind of thing. I mean, I enjoyed Gladiator, so to me, seeing even that film wasn't as bloody as I thought it was going to be, So, but it is what is, and I would enjoy a possible looking at some of his other work just to clarify why I didn't go and watch his films to begin with. So, anyone else have anything else to add?
No.
Alrighty, then I guess we'll wrap this up here. So, let's start with you, Dane. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I am Dane Kyle, aka Dane Damarung on YouTube. I am on a channel called Indie Horror Film Creative, where I do a show called Blu-ray Views, where I unbox Blu-rays and stuff. And I also am a filmmaker, trying to get something going this winter, coronavirus permitting, of course. We're already estimated to have an upsurge in the winter time, so who knows, but yeah, doing that and just trying to I think I've done a fairly good job of rebuilding my life after this hellish year. So yeah, just keep onward and upward.
Alrighty. And how about you, Forrest? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
All right, I'm Forrest Bennett. I'm based in Long Island, New York. I'm executive producer on a web series called Toxic America, which is now out on Vimeo on demand. For the first season, is now out on Vimeo on demand. Also an avid movie goer and comic book reader.
Awesome. And supposedly tomorrow night you're going to be on another podcast, correct?
Yes, I'll be on Unger the Radar. I'll be on my friend Randy Unger's show, Unger the Radar. We'll be watching and doing a commentary for Planes, Trains, and Automobiles for Thanksgiving.
Nice. Then let's see. Going over to you, Brandon. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do? Brandon. How about you, Jake, to get it started, and then we'll go back.
Well, I am Kotobuki Jake. I am co-host of Substance Sin versus the World, and I'm a movie collector fan. Try to put my hand in. Try and get some made once in a while. I'm trying to do that a little more. It's obviously very late, and I've been at work all night, so my brain's just not working. So we'll just go ahead and say, and I also like to hang out on this channel and talk with you fine folks about movies, and God willing, we'll be able to keep doing this in the future.
God willing, we'll all be back for the sequel. Search for more money.
Search for more money, indeed.
And Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Septum Sin versus the World. We're a fan of the physical media thing on our page there, and we reflect it with new release videos, pickup videos, and a couple of other basic things. Of course, we're kind of stuck thanks to the virus at the moment, but we do try our best. And we do a couple of playthroughs on the channel. We're doing a playthrough right now of the Angry Video Nerd, the Video Game Nerd Deluxe 1 and 2 game, which is a rather fun game to do a playthrough of. Of course, I also work with Inside Movies Galore, helping out. And of course, this is Martial Arts Mayhem. And next week, we have our pre-show and our main show. Our pre-show is Sword of the Stranger, an anime that was picked out by quite a few people. And then one of my favorite childhood ones, Big Trouble in Little China, is our main film of next week. So hopefully you all get to enjoy that and enjoy the channel.
Definitely. And my name is David Struggy. I'm one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. So thank you for coming along with us on our many adventure journey, where a bunch of us go on and talk about films that we see separately. And I think we've had a lot of fun over time. And definitely gonna have some interesting escapades in the following weeks. Hopefully it's not to the death, but we hope to be continuing and surviving at least until Christmas, and then we'll probably go on a small break and then come back with some more exciting titles for you. So stay tuned for some excellent films that we have up our Hobbiton sleeves. And we'll be sure to entertain you at least for several more evenings or two, or more. So
yes, let us entertain you.
Have a great day, evening, and morning wherever you are, and just enjoy. So, like, share, and subscribe, and say good night, everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Good
Right,
night.
everyone.